Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to my channel. I am Monet and you're watching LifeAsMonae. As I was doing my end of the year content and wrap-ups and just looking back on the year, I realized that I have read so many 2022 new releases. This is the most up-to-date I've ever been in terms of new releases, and so I've never done a tier ranking on my channel and I want to. So I figured this was a perfect time for me to look at the 40 something 2022 releases to see what was worth the hype, if I found some new favorites, how many of them I did not like, and it would help me put together my end of the year ranking. So yeah, I'm gonna try this for the first time and hopefully it goes the way I anticipate. So we have our categories here. We have new favorites, which is going to be the books that I read and loved this year that I would call a favorite. And then we have it did what it needed to do. These are books where, I read it, it was pretty good for the moment. I don't know if I would call it a favorite. I don't know if I would really reread it, but for all intents and purposes, the book did what it said it was going to do. And I understand why it could be others' favorites. It just may not be mine. And then we have meh, it was okay. These are books that I probably gave 2 or 3 out of 5 stars. Weren't really memorable, but what I do remember about it, I thought it was pretty okay. Then we have snoozefest. These are going to be the books that just really bored me. I probably can't remember much of what happened there. Books that just kind of put me to sleep, which was quite a few of them, if I'm going to be honest with you. And then we have what even was this? These are going to be books that I generally did not like, that I'm still trying to comprehend or understand what was happening, and they're definitely not worth the hype and not my favorite of the year. So first up, we have Stuck With You by Ali Hazelwood. This is a book that I didn't really want to read, but I ended up reading it for a secret project that I was doing on my channel earlier this year, and it's safe to say that I did not like this. I believe I gave this 1.5 out of 2 stars, so we're gonna put this right in the what even was this, because it just brings back so many enraging emotions. I was not a fan of that book, and of all the books that I read, I'm really not a fan of Ali Hazelwood, if I'm going to be honest. Then we have Nettle Bone. This was a book that I did not expect to enjoy as much as I did, but it had all of the perfect components for this book to be a favorite, and it really put T. Kingfisher on the map for me in terms of an author. I've read so many more books by them since then, and I've pre-ordered quite a few books coming out in the next 2 years, next 1 or 2 years, that I would say Nettle Bone would be a new favorite for me, because if I read it and I really enjoyed it and I've been reading other books by the author and I'm anticipating more books, then I would say that yeah, Nettle Bone put T. Kingfisher on the map, and it's a book that I would recommend and reread. For Finley Donovan Knocks 'Em Dead, this one was meh, it was okay. It wasn't as funny or as just enrapturing as book 1 was, but I didn't expect it to do much, especially because book 1 just had this perfect magic to it, and I feel like the more that we prolong these cozy murder mysteries, they start to lose their touch along the way. But as soon as I seen that the author was getting an adaptation, I was like, okay, yeah, they're definitely going to turn this into a series. They're going to get into their bag. I don't foresee me continuing after this one. It just doesn't have that experience that book 1 did. So I think that I will definitely check out the show, and I'm just going to have to use the context from the first 2 books that I have. Then we have Upgrade by Blake Crouch. This was an absolute snooze fest. I remember things that happened in the story, but honestly, it was just so boring. And I'm starting to think that just the Blake Crouch book that I enjoyed is going to be a one-off, because I haven't had that same magic again with any of his other stories. And even the one that I did kind of it was really okay. I think I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. Of all the books that I've read, I haven't had a 5-star read, and so it's starting to put me off of maybe just I'm never gonna get this amazing experience reading any books by Blake Crouch. So it may be time to hang it up, pack it up, go home. Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover. I have many gripes with this story, so this is gonna go into the what even was this category. Definitely not a favorite by Colleen Hoover. The only book that I've really enjoyed so far by her is It Ends With Us. So I gave that one 5 out of 5 stars, and also It Starts With Us. But any other book I've read by Coho so far have not been it. And there's just some questionable choices that she took in this storyline that I am utterly not a fan of. Then we have The Maid. I'm gonna put this in it did what it needed to do. It was a cozy murder mystery. I thought that it was pretty solid for a debut novel, and I'm looking forward to what else the author may do in the future, because I thought it was a pretty solid story throughout. It kept the readers engaged. It's not the most amazing murder mystery, but I think for this to be the first foray into this genre and writing a book, there were a lot more positives and just pro takeaways away from the book than there were cons. The Book Eaters is going to go under snoozefest. This is a book that I ended up DNFing just because I was not paying attention. I was not interested. I was very bored. Pages and pages would go by and I would physically read it with my eyes, but I would be thinking about other things, and I would have to go back and reread an entire chapter, which is crazy to me because you would think that if you're physically in the action of reading, engaging with reading, that you would be engaged with the words on the paper, but that was just not my experience. It was literally going in one eye and coming right out the other. Like, nothing was sticking about this book. I was very bored. Book Lovers, I'm stuck between putting Book Lovers between it was okay and it did what it needed to do. I feel like when it first came out, it hit my expectations for Emily Henry. It wasn't a new favorite, but it gave what I expected. But now looking back, I kind of feel like it was okay. I'll put it ahead of Finley Donovan Knocks Them Dead. But yeah, it did what it needed to do in the beginning, and just the more distant that I get away from the story, the more that I'm just like 3 out of 5. Like, yeah. Then we have Babel. This is not necessarily a new favorite, but it has the potential to be a new favorite if I was to reread it. I feel like I'm gonna go ahead and knock it up here just because I did give the book 5 out of 5 stars. So it was good. It was decent. There were some things that I wanted more from the story and more engagement from the story, but I do feel like I could possibly get those things if I was to give it a second read, which I do plan to give this one a second go around, and it does have potential to be a new favorite. All of Our Demise, I'm going to put this under What Even Was This? This was a very disappointing sequel and conclusion to the All of Us Villains duology. Book 1 just has so much action and just intrigue, and like the high stakes were there. You really were on the edge of your seat when you were reading because you didn't know what was going to come next, and the momentum just completely died down in All of Our Demise. I was disinterested for most of the book, and just everything that's anything in this duology happened in book 1, and I just feel like the pacing wasn't there. Like, maybe they should have spread some of the action out between book 1 and book 2. There were a lot of pump fakes in book 2 where the author was trying to like bring back that same like excitement and anxiety, but then it would just go nowhere and end up just turning out to be nothing, and that's something that I do not enjoy. Like, I would have rather had a slower book 1 ending on a cliffhanger and then packing most of the action that we got in book 1 into the book 2. The authors, Amanda Foody and Christine, I can't think of her last name, but they have another duology coming out that is also supposed to be kind of like a enemies to lovers romance, and I don't know because I didn't really enjoy the romance aspect of this duology, and it seems like it's going to take a center focus, even more of a focus in this new duology. So I feel like I'm going to let others read it before I read it and go off that. For Daisy Darker, this is going to be another one where we pop in What Even Was This? The twist in this book was just such a cheap cop-out. Like, I don't want to spoil it for you, but the story was not as interesting at all for the ending and the twist to be what it was. Like, if you're going to trust your readers to just be engaged enough throughout the story, you needed to have a bigger bang for the end of this book. It was not the most boring, but in hindsight, compared to like what you get at the end of the book and the twist that's supposed to be mind-blowing, it did not pay off for the investment of me continuing to read this book. And if I had known the twist or known the second genre, you know how some genres will be like mystery, but then it's like domestic, contemporary, where like there's a main genre and it has like this additional component. I can't share that without sharing like majority of the twist. But if I had knew the subgenre of this book and how that tied into the twist, I would have never picked this up at all. Spells for Forgetting was another snooze fest. I ended up DNFing this one as well. It was just very boring. It was not giving what I needed it to give at all. And I'm very disappointed because I relatively enjoyed the YA series by Adrienne Young, but I was more excited. I guess I had a lot of hope for her entering into adult fantasy, and this did not give adult fantasy at all, and it was less interesting than her YA stories, so it felt like a regression in terms of me being a fan of her writing. For One Italian Summer, this was okay. It fits with Rebecca's typical book writing, but in terms of it being impactful, I actually feel like In 5 Years did more to string the reader along and bring them like on this emotional journey than One Italian Summer did. And I also feel like if you had distinct similarities in your personal life similar to the main character of this story, you would relate to her more. But just generally objectively reading the story, there's not much emotional buy-in for a typical reader, which is something that I feel like is a necessary component when reading this story. And so I think I gave this 2.5 out of 5 stars. I will continue to read from her, but I don't think I've given any of the books I've read from her 5 stars, just because, again, I feel like all of her books, you have to have this like certain level of emotional investment, and she just hasn't been able to pull me in, but I feel like she could possibly one day. I always borrow these books from the library or listen to them on Scrib, so it really doesn't cost me much to keep reading them. I'm not losing, but I have faith that one day she's gonna give me like that 5-star read. I'm gonna be here for it. For Glow, definitely a new fave. I'm a big fan of the Guild series by Raven Kennedy. This book gave me everything I wanted and a little bit more, and I'm really looking forward to the next one. Kakeya was... So like this one's tricky too, because the ending of this book was definitely the weaker part, and so that makes it more disappointing when you have this high level of buy-in throughout the book, and then there's a dramatic shift in like the third quarter of the story that just really goes downhill, and that like impacted my enjoyment so much that I'm gonna have to go with like this was okay. Like it was okay for what it was attempting to do, but it's just, it really lost that stronghold of the reader throughout the story. For The Younger Wife, I'm going to put this in it did what it needed to do. If you've read from Sally Hempworth before, then it meets the expectations for her typical audience. Is it her best work? No. But I think that even if you were disappointed because you were looking for like a new Sally Hempworth favorite, this isn't like grading. Like there's not much to just harp on or complain about throughout the story. If you typically read domestic thrillers and you've read from this author before, I think that it was okay. Like it did what it needed to do. I'm not mad at it. I will continue to read from her, but so far I've read The Good Sister and The Younger Wife. I do think that there's a book called The Other Wife or something like that by her that I have not read yet. At this point, between the two that I've read, I much prefer The Good Sister, but take that with a grain of salt because domestic thrillers can be very tricky. For The Measure, I'm going to put that this book was okay. It had a very interesting plot. I wanted more of a sci-fi element, but it took a shift throughout the book where it was more so focused on like this introspection into humanity and how we deal with bad news and how our perception of life changes how we value life and how we value the life that we live. And I just wanted more from the premise of the story, and so it was okay. Like I feel like it could have packed a lot more of a punch. For The Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School, definitely a new favorite, coming in at my top of the year for 2022. I loved everything about this book. I am in awe. I would stand on a soapbox and rave about this book. Just there's so many components that I just love, and I was just happy to see it in a YA story, and just I'm proud of the representation that occurred in this book. And I feel like there's something here for just a wide variety of young adults, and also for adults that have experiences or have had experiences similar to the main character of the story, that it just has that component that you can just really connect to as you're reading. And so I really love this book. The Atlas 6 was not a new favorite, but I feel like it did what it needed to do. I'll put it ahead of The Maid. I will be continuing with the next sequel when I get it in the mail, because I have a special edition from Fairy Loot, and so now I have to wait for Fairy Loot to send the second book in the series, because I don't want to have different versions of the story, especially because I know that Fairy Loot is going to send this book as well. So I'm looking forward to reading the sequel, and maybe the duology as a whole can enter into a favorite. But for right now, book one as it stands is not strong enough for me to call it a potential fave. Under One Roof was not very good. I'm gonna put that under what even was this. I think I disliked No, I disliked Stuck With You way more than I disliked Under One Roof. Just again, I have that vlog out where I read all of Ali Hazelwood's books. I'll put it in the description bar so you guys can check that out, or in the cards above. But yeah, you'll get all my opinions on what I think is mediocrity of Ali Hazelwood. Small Angels was another snooze fest. I DNF'd this one as well just because I was not interested at all. Like 100 pages in, I didn't care about what was happening. It gave me the same feeling as like everything else. Like in this genre is literally a great reflection of books that put me to sleep. And so if you ever see me about to read something that would just find this home in this place, stop me before I make a bad choice, because these are all paper melatonin. They're all paper melatonin. A Curse of Blood and Stone was extremely disappointing, so I'm gonna put this in the what even was this genre. It was the sequel to Fate of Wrath and Flame, and book 2 it failed on so many levels, and I don't foresee me continuing with the series unless the next book slaps and like someone else reads it, my friends read it, and they like bully me into like giving this series another chance. Other than that, I think that this is where I get off, this is where I stop, and not going forward. The Book of Gothel it was okay. It was okay. It was a mix between snooze fest and it was all right. I wasn't the most engaged with it, but it promises to accomplish certain things, and I think that if you understood that going in, you might be satisfied. I don't see it being anyone's new favorite at all. It's kind of like Kakea, where there were some moments in the story where it was strong and it really pulled you in, and then there was kind of like this break in engagement where the story was just going downhill. It's not very memorable. I'm glad that I did not buy a physical copy of this one. I got the ARC from the publisher, but if I had purchased this book, I would have returned it. I'm gonna be honest with you. Even if I had the audiobook from Audible, I would have probably wanted my credit back. But is this worthy of borrowing on Libby? I think so. And it's also worthy of borrowing from your library. But unless you know that you're gonna really like give this book at least 3.5 out of 5 stars, don't spend your money. Definitely borrow it from somewhere or someone, because it's not worth it. Booth was also another one that was just okay. This book follows the person who assassinated Abraham Lincoln. I think his name was John Wilkes Booth. I could be very wrong about that, but it follows his family and their upbringing and their fallout from his assassination of the president, which I thought was very interesting because he was raised in a very interesting household and he had a lot of siblings and they were all interesting characters. And so I just appreciated the author taking what would have been a lot of research that is already out there, but instead of focusing on the 2 most pivotal characters to a story, and I say characters like this because this actually happened in real life, but instead of taking 2 of the key people in the story and like backing out of that and focusing on what was happening in the background all around them, I really enjoyed that. It was not a new favorite, but I think if you like historical fictions and you're interested in that and you would enjoy something like that, I would recommend. The Final Strife is another one that did what it needed to do. I was pleasantly surprised by this one. I did not expect to enjoy it as much as I did. I have a wrap up for this one as well that I will link in the cards above, and I talk more in depth about my opinions of the book, but I am very much looking forward to the sequel, and I do foresee myself finishing this series, and also if the author releases another release, I'll definitely check that one out. Olga Dies Dreaming, it's also another one that kind of like did what it promised to do. It's not a new favorite. I don't foresee it being marketable to a wide audience, but if this is your typical genre of books that you like to read from, or like authors you like to read from, I do think there's something here that is worth like reading. Gallant is one that I enjoyed when I read it, but it's not very memorable now. I just remember all the things I like about the story, but not really the story itself. And so I'm going to go with it did what it needed to do, because I feel like the marketing of this was appropriate. Now, it's not saying that if you read this book, you're definitely going to like it, but I feel like the marketing and the promotional materials went into what you can expect from the story. Confessions of an Alleged Good Girl is a new favorite. I love this book so much. I love this author so much. This is her sophomore release, and I've given her debut and her sophomore release both 5 stars. This is another book that was my top of the 2022 year, and I don't love it more than The Lesbiana's Guide, but like it is immediately after. The Witch and the Czar was another snooze fest, and that's so sad because it had such a beautiful cover, and I was so looking forward to following like another Baba Yaga story and Ivan the Terrible, but there just wasn't enough buildup of an emotional, compelling story for Baba Yaga, and I also feel like that's necessary for the ending to have an impact on the reader. You have to be emotionally invested and connected to Baba Yaga in the beginning, and I feel like the author just failed to build that bridge between the reader and the characters. Love in the Brain was okay. Again, if you want more details about how I feel about Ali Hazelwood and her writing, please check out that reading vlog. The Daughter of Dr Moreau, I DNF. This was another snooze fest. And I do think that Silvia Moreno Garcia is a wonderful author, and I think that her books are purposely marketed, and I'm learning that. And so now I know that I can't take a chance on her writing. Like, if she writes a book that is in alignment with me and what I typically like to read, I expect to love it. It would be a 5-star prediction. But she writes these kind of like outside of the box books that touch on so many subgenres that still don't necessarily align with my reading taste. And so I don't have the best enjoyment going into her stories. I feel like she's a very atmospheric writer. She's fantastic at building an environment and a world around her. She's very descriptive with the writing, but I just never have investment into the actual storyline to have much takeaway from the book or sustenance in the book. And so I will just have an eye out for this author, because I do think that they put out quite a few books. They're always jumping around to different genres, and so I just need to wait my turn. I'm too impatient. I'm too preemptive. I'm just gonna chill back and relax, and I will wait until they release something that's like right up there with me. Lessons in Chemistry. It did what it needed to do. I'm gonna put this one like above the Atlas 6. I don't expect too much going into the story. Like, if you read the synopsis of the story, you know that we're gonna follow a white woman in like the 1950s and 60s in America. She's a scientist. She's gonna face a lot of discrimination and sexism, and she is not the most socially inept. And so I feel like it was interesting to follow her story. I wasn't expecting her to be the most relatable or the biggest reflection of a diverse community of women in America, but for her socioeconomic status in the story, it made sense. It was very compelling, and I knew what I was getting going into the story, and so I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it, but I just didn't expect to see much representation, and I think that if you have that expectation, you're going to be severely disappointed. It Starts With Us is a new fave, another book that I love by Colleen Hoover. It's the prequel to It Ends With Us. It was an extended epilogue. She didn't add anything else. Like, you literally just got a couple hundred more pages with Atlas and Lily, and that was it. Like, she just gave us more time in a story that I really enjoyed, and I appreciate her for not trying to change it up too much. What My Bones Know, I'm so sorry, so sad, is going to have to go above The Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School, because this is a book that I wholeheartedly believe changed my perspective on certain things in life. We're following, this is the autobiography. The author has complex PTSD, and they were diagnosed with it at a time before like it had this huge social media promotion behind, I wouldn't say promotion behind it, but before it became like this everyday like colloquial term to use. It's about them trying to navigate something that just doesn't have a lot of research around it, doesn't have a lot of just research supported ways to deal with it. And the way she talks about her complex PTSD and the things that she goes through, it really puts you in her shoes. And I really appreciate her for giving me that perspective. I don't say this lightly, but I do think that this book made me a better person. Besides that, it's beautiful, beautiful writing. She does her own audiobook narration. And so when I first read this book, I borrowed it from audio on Libby, and it was just like so freaking good that I had to go buy a physical copy just so I can annotate and highlight and just make notes, because so many of the points were hitting home. I can't say that it was like relatable because I don't suffer from complex PTSD, but I do think that it changed my perspective, and it did a lot for me. There's so much to take away from that book. Red Lip Theology is going to be another favorite. This is about a Black woman reconciling her connection to the Black church and how it treats and sees Black women in society today, and how sometimes when you're searching for a community, especially within a church community, how it can be detrimental to the advancement of Black women. It can be detrimental to their social self-esteem and how they see themselves. And so I thought that this was very interesting, because most of the time when you have books that reconcile their connection to a religious institution, they always kind of, not always, but generally, they take the side of, I'm going to take God with me and disconnect from the church because I don't want the negative connotations that's associated with the church. Her perspective was different, because she's not giving up on the church, but she is giving up on certain denominations and certain things that are attached to denominations. And so she is kind of leading this charge of still being within the church and like breaking off a separate infrastructure, and like you can still have that community, you can still have that acceptance and that love and that companionship without those negative things, and like being an example in the church of how to do that. And I thought that that was beautiful. I want to see more stories like that. I believe in reform, and sometimes you have to separate from the church if you just have too many negative experiences, but I do find solace in individuals that are like, okay, I can see that this is not a reflection of my religion and how I see God and how I see myself as a Black woman, and I'm going to stand my ground, and I'm going to be an example of something different within the same community. Required reading for the disenfranchised freshman. What even was this? I DNF'd this book. There were so many problematic things within this story. It was not for me at all. I don't think that that book is for really anyone. Beast of Ruins did what it needed to do as a sequel to Beast of Prey. I was not disappointed within the story. It kept a lot of the momentum from book one. It does suffer a little bit from middle book syndrome, but in my perspective, it could be worse. Like the middle book syndrome could be worse to the point where like I didn't want to continue and read the finale, but it wasn't like, by the time I was like, okay, I'm kind of over this book, it ended. So it's not too long. It's not drawn out, and I do think that we see progression in the plot, and it held me on just enough so where I am gonna read book 3. Thistlefoot was, I think I would call this a new fave, maybe, because it was just so fun. Like, it has potential to be a new favorite. It's a book that I would reread. It's very different. We see Baba Yaga in a modern sense. We're following her descendants. It's an urban fantasy. It's a melting pot of all these different genres and subgenres, and you have Slavic or Russian folklore in an American setting, and I feel like the author did so many great things within the story that even if it's not a new favorite, I would probably talk about it like it is, because there's just so many positive things to say about the story, and I would recommend it like it is, even if it's not a new favorite. Tomorrow is another book that did what it needed to do. I probably put this one a little before, I'll leave it after the Atlas 6. It wasn't what I expected. I wanted a little bit more of the romance to be a center plot, but the romance as it is in the book teaches the reader a lot, even if it's not the perfect love story or has the perfect fairy tale components to it. I do think there's like a raw reality to the way that love is depicted within the story and how it really affects and changes the people that are experiencing it. And so even though it wasn't like a new fave and it wasn't what I expected, it did what it needed to do. Stay Awake was somewhere between a snooze fest and What Even Was This. I'm gonna go with What Even Was This because, let's put this here. Megan Golden wrote The Night Swim, and that's a book that I really loved, 5 out of 5 stars. And we went from like 5 stars to like a 1 star. Like, that was such a drastic drop. I was very disappointed in this. It didn't live up to really anything. On top of that, it was boring. But also, it just wasn't what I expected from this author being a sophomore release. Like, book 1, or the first book that they released, was light years ahead of Stay Awake. The Stardust Thief was a snooze fest as well, but I'll put it at the end. The beginning just failed to hook me. I ended up DNFing because the book did get better. I explained this in a previous wrap-up, but it just wasn't, I didn't have enough investment in the beginning of the story just because it was so boring, and I had to fight through to get to the better part of the book, and I don't have any interest in seeing how the book ends or continuing with the sequel at all. You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty, going in the number 1 spot for What the Fuck Was This? So the book was chaotic. It was messy for the sake of being messy, and I have not many positive things to say. Actually, if I sat here and thought really hard, I don't think I'd come up with a single positive thing to say about this book. So yeah, it was a book of all negative, all cons, and I don't know if I need a quick A to write any more romance. I don't know if we need them in this genre at all. So yeah, what a journey. Looking back on my reading experience for 2022 releases, it was very few hits, lots of misses, lots of melatonins, and lots of just what the fuck. And then there was just quite a few that it did what it promised to do. And I don't have anything else to say in addition to that, honestly. So thanks for watching my video, and if you've made it to the end, comment down a bone symbol for my new favorite, What My Bones Though, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.